I was aware of KSARC early on when they were first called Rape Relief. But when I first started working with KSARC was in the late 80s when I was chair of the Auburn Coalition on Teenage Pregnancy Prevention. And KSARC was part of that coalition, helping us to teach teenagers about date rape and what kind of signs to look out for in a dating relationship. So I got to know Mary Ellen Stone that way, and we have been working together off and on since the late 80s, and she has provided a continuity for that organization that you just don't see in other human service agencies.
When we started, we were called King County Rape Relief, and the focus was, as was sexual assault programs, the few that were existing around the country, is that we heard from adult women who were raped. We still provide a lot of services to adult women who are raped, but in the course of the last 30 years, what we've realized is that sexual assault heavily impacts young people. And so we have had to shift our services to make sure that we have a very strong program for children and teens, because they are more likely to be victimized in some way than are adults. And the figures, even though we're seeing a decline in childhood sexual assault, which we are feeling very encouraged about, are still 1 out of 3 girls and 1 out of 5 boys experience a sexual assault by the age of 18.
My name is Martin Santos. I'm 17 years old. I was born in a Hispanic family from Mexico. Mother had 13 siblings. It's a big family. The one thing that I am built upon was family. That was my core. The abuse started when I was about 5 years old, and it continued until I was about 13. And it was from 2 older cousins of mine. I respected these cousins that were older than me, that knew more than I did. And that's why I felt that I almost had an obligation to do what they told me to do. There's been guilt from the day I was 5 years old until today. I still feel that it's my fault that my family split up. You know, half the family went one way, half the family went another way. One side chose to believe. One side chose to act like it never happened. KSARC sent somebody out who was there to support me during the trial. And at that point, I almost fell in love with this program, that they're there to help in any way they can. And as trial continued, as days continued, they were there to call me to ask how I was doing. They were there to call me and say if I needed counseling. And they respected everything that I wanted or didn't want. Those 3 words and the silence are the strongest words that I've heard. I ended my silence. I did that for me. I said something. Every time I talk about it, something inside me heals. Something inside me gets better.
When I entered the ministry 52 years ago, this was a subject that was very, very difficult for clergy and for congregants to be at all comfortable about. And it was really, there was a great deal of silence around this. So KSARC's theme about ending the silence really shows where we were and how we've come.
I mean, I've been lucky to have been working for KSARC for 30 years. And I started when the whole movement around sexual assault was just getting going. And it wasn't something that we talked about as a society. And so it was very exciting to get involved with something so new. I bring a master's in counseling, but really it's been my desire to promote the issue and the organization that I think has allowed me to really help move the organization forward.
The very first Destination Auburn fundraiser that I helped put together several years ago, remember the surprise when the guest speaker, the guest parent and client of KSARC was a friend of mine. And that really brought home the fact that none of us are invincible. We're all vulnerable to this kind of crime. And this was a friend's daughter that had been attacked, and she'd gotten help through CASARC, and it made a huge difference. Just the fact that you don't expect it to be somebody that you know well, because we don't always talk about our past or our children's challenges. It doesn't always come up in relationships, and CASARC's helped us talk more about that.
And this is where the benefit of having done this for 30 years, you look back and say, really, it was worse 30 years ago. And it's probably hard for a lot of viewers to imagine a time when we didn't talk about sexual assault the way we can talk about it now. When this organization got started 32 years ago, it was highly controversial. And the thought that we would publicly talk about such a sensitive issue made a lot of people extremely uncomfortable, because it just wasn't something that our society was willing to talk about for all sorts of reasons. What that ended up doing is protecting the offender. It certainly discouraged victims from coming forward. And what we have certainly seen over the years is that we have been able to create a climate, I think quite successfully, not completely, but pretty successfully, that says to victims, if this happens, this is what sexual assault looks like. If this happens to you, there are people, you will get support, you will get understanding, there are resources available. At the same time, we're also saying to sex offenders, this is what sexual assault looks like. If you're doing this, it's wrong, it's against the law, you'll be punished, we will hold you accountable. And that's not just CASARC, that's all of the community saying that. And I think that, now we're not there by a long shot, but we're a whole lot farther than we were 30 years ago.
I was so pleased to be able to be a part of seeing on the board the development of a complete array of Spanish-speaking services in our Don DeVos program, telling the story. And CASARC also partners with other resources for diversity of services, for people of immigrant populations, and of different people other than the majority culture. And those are critical services, because my sense is that people in the immigrant populations are oftentimes have barriers to find services, and even difficulty stepping up to say I need help. And we've done a lot in that, which meets the changing populations of Auburn and Kent and South County and all of King County.
And our mission is to make sure that we can reach people where they are. We're looking ahead to, what those technologies might be a couple of years from now, so again, we can be accessible. We started with one 24-hour resource line that was staffed by volunteers. We're going to be needing something very different in a couple of years from now. So we are, of course, changing with the times and with the information that's out there and what we learn about sexual assault. We have a commitment certainly to keep services free, because we believe that victims of crime shouldn't have to pay twice for the service. If something's happened to them, they're already paying in a lot of ways, and so our services are free. Support from all the South King County cities is part of what makes that possible, as well as King County, the state, and a lot of private donors. We work in two areas. One is to help victims move from being a victim to being a survivor. So we've got a whole range of things, from a 24-hour resource line that's answered by real people 24 hours a day. These are trained professionals. We have help through the legal system. And most people, our big experience of the legal system may be traffic fines or something. And so most people have no idea what it's like to be a witness for the state. It takes 18 months to 2 years. It's a very daunting process, even now, even here. And so we help people every step of the way through that process. And we have 8 highly trained, experienced staff members who understand what's meant to happen, who can be the troubleshooting, who are literally there with victims through interviews and trial, and if there's a conviction, the sentencing. So we offer all of that. We provide help with medical evaluations. We do a lot of work with helping whole families recover. So it's helping parents, because if a parent if a child's been sexually assaulted, the parent or parents often going to be saying, how could I have seen this? Why couldn't I see this happen? What could I have done differently? How could I have prevented this? If maybe they have been a victim themselves, it brings up all that work. So we work with parents to help them parent their child who's been sexually assaulted and make that family stronger.
Our children and our young people live in a different world today than I grew up in, and that parents of even the current generation of parents grew up in. And it's so important to be able to have the resources and the insight for parents to help and to support the most important thing in their lives, their children. And lots of parents don't know how to do that. They want to. And in light of what you see on television and the news about such poor parenting that goes on these days, the parenting aspect of what KSARC does and the support of the education people in our bullying programs in junior high schools and the cyber protection issues all fit together to give a cafeteria of services for parents that they all need. And that's why we keep telling the story, so that we can say, hey, there's help here, and it's available, it's free, and it's very professional.
Our mission is to end sexual assault, and I'm not going to see it in my lifetime, but I certainly have seen the progress. And so we do a lot of prevention education work, working with the faith communities, working with now youth who are particularly at risk of being approached online, and so some of the cyber safety work we do, because that's a real high risk arena for certain kinds of teenagers, and so we want to make sure that they've got that there are ways that they can protect themselves, and the adults around them can protect them as well. So we're doing prevention work in that arena. We do a lot of training with providers, with people, everything from Children's Protective Services to law enforcement to school counselors, because it's not just KSARC doing this work. I mean, every one of us knows victims. Every one of us knows offenders. And so how can we help victims get help? How can we hold offenders accountable? And so that's where we put a lot of emphasis as well.
The numbers are sort of hard to believe when you're sitting in a room full of women. You think that 1 out of 3 of them have been a victim of sexual assault. So that's looking at to your right and to your left and figuring one of your friends maybe has not talked about it, but has been a victim of some level. KSARC's helped us all to understand that, and that it's not just about girls, but about our young boys too. And I'm the mother of 2 boys, so that was important for me to learn those kinds of statistics too, that my kids were at risk and what I could do to help them. And now with the internet, information is so much more readily available. You can go to KSARC's website, kcsarc.org, and get a lot of information, how to talk to our kids, or if we're victims ourselves, how to get help.
I use the website of KSARC a lot and refer people to the myriad of resources for parents, for teenagers. When I got some books together for my grandchildren about being safe, I went to the KSARC website and got that information so that I could use to purchase the books that I wanted for my own grandchildren. Congregations can use all of those resources in youth groups, in summer camp settings, or wherever they're working with young people, to be able to get the information out and to create an atmosphere where it's okay to talk about this. There's more we can do, but KSARC has been there with great resources. And when clergy understand and congregational leaders understand themselves the critical nature of the problem in our whole culture, everything is there that they need.
Washington State is a leader in the country when it comes to sexual assault issues. We have been out there in the forefront in terms of our laws and our sophistication of services, our support for sexual assault programs. The state has really, it's something to be very proud of. King County is obviously sort of a very much of a major player in that, and we are, the lead advocacy organization and treatment organization in King County. We work in partnership with Harborview, and that we have a really good system of services here. We've always been based in Renton because we've always felt like it's been important to have a South King County presence. And we all know that more children and families live in South County than do any other part of the county, and that shows up in our stats, where 77% of all of the people we serve live in South King County. If I look at our whole caseload again of victims and families, 59% of those are children and teens. Again, that ties back to that's a particularly vulnerable group.
Not all agencies can be located in every community. So when you have an agency like the King County Sexual Assault Resource Center, it may not be located in Auburn, but it is there to serve the Auburn community. So it is still part of Auburn. We still need to be aware and help that agency, even though it may be located in Renton. There's only a couple of agencies in all of King County that do this kind of work, and we're lucky to have them as close as Renton. And our kids are well served and our parents are well served, even though they are not located in the city of Auburn. So I try to emphasize to people that regional efforts also need our support.
I think, on one hand, I look at big events that we have, whether they're with the city of Auburn or with, in other South King County cities or in Seattle, where we have hundreds and hundreds of people literally standing with us to say, we're supporting King County Sexual Assault Resource Center, we're here for victims, we're holding offenders accountable. There is that sense of we're not just out there by ourselves doing this. There is that much larger sense of community support. I continue to get goosebumps every time that happens, because it sends such a strong message to victims and their families that they're not alone. And it sends the equally strong message to offenders saying, this is not acceptable behavior. So that's one highlight. I think another for me is, and I'm not involved with working with victims and their families, although I certainly have the honor of talking with them and hearing how we've been able to help them move from being a victim in a very, very challenging place to being a survivor, and to look back and say, this was an awful thing that happened to me, but I'm doing okay now. And I will look back on that, and it won't dominate my life. For us to be able to do that, and for me indirectly to be part of helping people, helping particularly women and kids get back on their feet, is very rewarding, and that's why I do this work.
When I was about 8 years old was the first time that it happened. And for the longest time I thought that something was wrong with me and that it was my fault. And I kept it quiet for a very, very long time. And finally when I was 13 years old, I got the strength to say, no more. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm really happy that my mom and I and my sister have all been able to be helped through CASARC.
I think one of our most crucial moments was where she realized she wasn't to blame for the abuse or for what the family had experienced.
It was probably about my 6th week into going to the treatment at CASARC, and Marianne finally got to me because she said she felt like I was harboring so much guilt for what had happened. And that made me break down because I had felt so guilty my entire life. Marianne completely changed my view of the world.
The one thing that stands out to me about Ashton's story is just the fact that she ended the silence, that she was able to talk about what had happened to her. She was able to share her experience, and not only with me, that she's able to share it with others as well now. I mean, that's just amazing.
I realized that if my story could maybe help somebody else, even if it was just one person, that it would make a difference to that person, and that's what matters, because CASARC made such a difference in my life. I'd like to help somebody else in return.
I think when people who have been served by CASARC, whether it's adults or young people or children, are empowered to tell their story, we go a long ways in helping to end the silence. a great thing as far as their own growth is concerned to be able to do that. But for us to be able to hear those stories and see those people having recovered their sense of self and their feelings of empowerment, it's really something that really touches here. I'm not sure people would tell those stories, would be able to tell those stories if I know they would not be able to tell those stories if they'd not gone through that difficult, painful, hopeful, helpful time that our therapists and our legal advocates and our educators provide.
King County Sexual Assault Resource Center is unique in that it deals with a very sensitive subject, and someone without training is unlikely to be able to volunteer like you would for the Auburn Food Bank, packing foods in bags for people. And so there's a limited amount of ways you can get involved in helping to make a difference. And helping with fundraising is one key one, because of course with the government revenue's down, we are all depending more and more on the community to support our key human service agencies, such as CASARC. There are still many kids being abused in our community, and it's our responsibility to do something about it, not just sit back. And that's what makes you feel good about contributing to CASARC's fundraisers or being involved in planning them. And there's so often not many ways we can reach out and really make a difference like that. And CASARC does give us that ability to feel good about doing something and not sitting back and ignoring the problem.
We all know people have been victimized. So, and one of the messages we want to tell people is that it's never too late to reach out for help. So if one of our viewers here knows someone who's been victimized and is thinking, how do I help? I mean, people can always call us. We have a 24-hour resource line that's available 24 hours a day. They can make that call. Because people always know victims, I mean, part of it is individuals being supportive and listening and not blaming. It's, we feel like, what do I say? Well, listening is probably one of the biggest things that people can do. A lot of times, too, people are saying, well, what do I do to prevent this? How can I keep myself and my family safe? What we know from all the work in prevention is that the more parents can have good communication with their kids, the more likely they are to be able to keep those kids safe. That's not easy in these days. I know that's very challenging, but it's that keeping that communication and that connection going and making sure that our kids, the kids in our lives, whether they're our own, our children or our nieces or our nephews or, kids who are important to us, that if something comes up, those kids can tell us what's going on. And so for us to keep that in mind, because it's not just CASARC putting out a message, it's everybody changing the climate around sexual assault that says it's okay to talk about it. In fact, the more we talk about it, the more we increase our own safety and we send the message to offenders that this isn't acceptable. The final piece certainly is we rely heavily on support from local and state government and from individuals. And we're a private nonprofit organization. Almost 40% of our funding comes from individuals and foundations, but mostly individuals. And we've had some very moving notes from people who have written modest checks, but who've said, this happened to me when I was a kid, and I don't want this to happen to anybody else, and I want to make this gift to help that from happening. We've also had some very generous, large checks as well. But people help us with their actions, people help us with their support, and that's what makes all the difference.
It is so important to me to be part of an agency that is doing what CASARC is doing, because no one else is doing it. And it is so important, and to see the sacrifice that people make when they give donations to us. And government support and public funding is in very difficult straits these days, as we all know. So donors who are willing to and generously give to us have always been critical in CASARC's service, but it's even more important now.
I know that the City of Auburn does give money every year out of our general fund budget, but it only pays for a fraction of the numbers that they serve in our community. We're not able to give them as much money as we would like, so we do need the community to step up and support that service. It's about the kids. What's more important than that?
Once you find your voice, you're never going to lose it again.